All right. Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for this masterclass on ADHD. I am so excited you're here, and I know that Desroy is too. My name is Johnathon Fortune, and I'm the co-founding director of Theragen Counseling and Consulting, based here in Grand Prairie. So I've been working in the mental health field since 2013. And over the years, I've really developed a passion for supporting children, families, and especially men as they navigate some complex mental health challenges. So, through my work, I noticed a gap in services for children in our community, really around getting ADHD specific services. So, before we dive in, I'd like to hand it over to Desroy, who's going to introduce himself a little bit.
Thank you, Jonathan. Hello, everyone. My name is Desroy. I am currently doing my master's in social work, and I am interning with Jonathan at Theragen Counseling and Consulting Inc. And so, just a little bit about me. So I used to be an educator. And so, one of the things that sort of led me into doing this work is recognizing that as an educator, I was not necessarily equipped with tools and resources to support children and youth who are on the spectrum or have a neurodevelopmental diagnosis. And so that was primarily one of the reasons why I decided to get involved in this type of work. And so for this presentation, what I'm hoping is that you would get some additional information, tips and skills in terms of how you can apply that to sort of support children or just individuals who may have an ADHD diagnosis.
Yeah, thanks, Desiree. So before we dive in, I want to share a little bit about why I'm here, why this program exists, and in my work as a therapist, I've noticed a huge gap in the support available for children with ADHD. So over the years, many of my adult clients have shared with me how their children struggle with attention, focus, impulsivity, and they often feel lost in how to help. So, as a therapist and someone with ADHD myself, I knew I needed to do something about it. So, having ADHD means that I know what it's like to live with these challenges firsthand. So, honestly, I apply many of the strategies that Desroy is going to talk about today to myself on a regular basis. Um, these strategies that I use, whether it's reminders or breaking things down into manageable pieces or some of the other more complicated stuff that Desiree is going to talk about, are exactly the tools that we use in behavior therapy. And they work for me, they work for kids, and I hope by the end of this session, you'll see how they can work for you and your family too. So let's jump in. So, behavior therapy. Um, Go back a slide, Desiree. So, behavior therapy is the foundation of what you're going to learn today. So, what is it? It's a structured, evidence-based approach to helping children manage ADHD symptoms by teaching specific skills. So, it's about changing behaviors through things like reinforcement, building routines, and teaching emotional regulation. It's also backed by science. So there's decades of research that show that behavior therapy is one of the most effective treatments for managing ADHD in children, especially for children under the age of 12. So it focuses on real world skills that children can use every day to help with focus, organization, and emotional regulation. So why does it work? It teaches practical skills. So your child's gonna learn how to manage impulsivity, attention challenges, and emotional regulation, empowering them to make better choices. It also promotes positive behavior. So, by reinforcing desired behaviors through rewards and consistent feedback, children begin to take on healthier habits. It also builds long term success. So, behavior therapy doesn't just address short term issues, it provides your child with the tools to succeed at home, school, and in school settings over the long term. It's also behavior therapy is also family centered. So you'll learn strategies to support the skills your child's building, making it a collaborative effort that really strengthens the progress. So all of the strategies that you'll learn in this session are grounded in behavior therapy, and it really is a proven approach that helps children with ADHD lead more focused, balanced, and successful lives. So, how do we know that this works? So, in May of 2024, May of this year, we developed this program, and 38 families so far have completed it. And we've been getting really great results so far. So, 100% of caregivers reported an increase in focus, attention, and organization. 100% also reported an increase in emotional regulation, and 100% reported a decrease in hyperactive and disruptive behavior. And we're really waiting to see how report card time goes. Now that report cards are kind of coming out, we're excited to hear some feedback on the families that have gone through the program. And another thing to mention, many experts recommend incorporating medication alongside behavior therapy for children with ADHD. So it can help improve focus and emotional regulation. And while not every family may find that medication is an ideal fit for them, studies suggest that it can be a helpful addition to behavior therapy and traditional therapy, really providing kids with valuable skills to manage their attention and impulses in daily life. And with all that being said, I will hand it over to Desroy.
Okay. Thank you, Jonathan. For this presentation, the topics that we will be covering. So essentially, I will be providing an overview of ADHD. I will also be contextualizing ADHD and self-regulation. We will also talk about developmentally appropriate, exploring the four functions of behavior. We will also talk about structure and routine, as well as visual supports and rewards. So, what is ADHD? So the acronym ADHD stands for Attention Deficit Hyperactivity Disorder. And so ADHD, as it is commonly called, is one of the most common neurodevelopmental disorders. And so it is typically diagnosed in childhood and can often last into adulthood. And so as we progress through this presentation, we will also be looking at some of the symptoms of ADHD. So ADHD is typically characterized by three main symptoms or three main features. And so two of those are hyperactivity and impulsivity. And so some examples of hyperactivity and impulsivity. So you may sometimes see an individual, a child or youth who appear to move constantly, fidgeting with fingers or climbing or sometimes running. They may also sometimes have trouble remaining in one spot or one position. Sometimes you may encounter an individual that talks excessively. And so in older youth or adults, they sometimes describe having racing thoughts. A lot of times with kids, during a conversation, you may experience them sometimes blurting out information in the middle of a conversation or just blatantly interrupting. Sometimes they may have an issue with turn taking. And so sometimes if you have a child with ADHD who is at the back of the line, sometimes they may grow a little impatient. And sometimes you may see that individual skipping the line and going all the way to the front. And so again, it's just a symptom of the diagnosis. So the other component of ADHD is the piece around inattention. And so a lot of times you find that individuals with an ADHD diagnosis may sometimes lack focus on details in school, work, or other related activities. They may sometimes appear to not be listening when others are speaking. They do not necessarily always follow through on required schoolwork. And if it's an older individual, office-related work. Or sometimes you may have kids who don't always follow through on chores that are assigned at home. They may sometimes appear to be disorganized and often losing items, and they become easily distracted and sometimes will pay attention to the wrong thing. And so, one of the things I want to emphasize is with the features of ADHD, both the hyperactivity and the impulsivity, as well as inattention. A child may demonstrate some or a combination of these features. And so, not because a child has ADHD, it doesn't mean that they will display all of the features that are listed here. So some statistics about ADHD. So in Canada, ADHD prevalence in children ranges from 5% to approximately 9%, and in adults around 3% to 5%. And so boys are more likely to be diagnosed than girls in childhood. And so it stands at a ratio of about 2 to 1 or 3 to 1. But ADHD is often underdiagnosed in girls due to less hyperactive behavior. However, over the years, the rate of diagnosing boys to girls have sort of changed because of better screening tools and just the heightened awareness around ADHD. So, in terms of the differences in presentation between boys and girls, so if we were to talk about the hyperactivity versus the inattention piece, so in boys, they are more likely to exhibit hyperactive and impulsive behavior, which in most cases will make it easier for a practitioner to diagnose a male child with ADHD. Whereas in girls, they often display inattentive symptoms such as daydreaming or quiet distractibility rather than being hyperactive. And so as a result of that, that makes it a little bit more challenging for a medical practitioner or psychologist or a psychiatrist to diagnose a female with ADHD. In terms of social and emotional behavior, boys, so in terms of the ADHD symptoms in boys, it can include acting out. And so sometimes you may see a male child being disruptive, and this could be in the home or at school. And they may sometimes demonstrate more aggressive actions, which will often lead to the school administering or taking disciplinary actions against that individual. Again, in terms of the social and emotional behavior for girls, they tend to have internalized behaviors such as low self-esteem, anxiety, and social withdrawal. And so this sometimes can be mistaken for emotional issues rather than ADHD. In terms of the upsides of ADHD, so a lot of individuals with ADHD often demonstrate a sense of creativity, curiosity, resilience, and typically, most individuals typically have a lot of energy and passion. And so there are some famous folks with ADHD. And so we have folks like Simone Biles, who is a famous gymnast. We have Justin Timberlake, Paris Hilton, and Channing Tatum. Okay, so ADHD and self-regulation. So earlier in the presentation, we talked about some of the features of ADHD, and we talked about impulsivity, where an individual may sometimes blurt out answers without waiting. We For someone with ADHD and self-regulation issues, they may sometimes display intense frustration over small setbacks. So we talk about like an individual with turn taking. So we may see that individual cutting the line and sort of going towards the front because they are sort of impatient and cannot wait for their turn. And so just to sort of give you an insight into what self-regul dysregulation may look like. And so in terms of the regulation or self-regulation piece, so let's say, for example, you have a student who is frustrated with a difficult math problem. So instead of giving up or getting upset, they may take a deep breath. They may break down the problem into smaller steps and stay focused until they've solved it. And so this sort of shows a sense of impulse control, focus, frustration management, and planning. And so these are important components essentially where maintaining good self-regulation is concerned. So sort of going back to the example that I mentioned initially about blurting out answers. So if an individual has good self-regulation, then essentially what we're saying is then that individual wouldn't blurt out answers or information. And so one of the things that I want to emphasize with self-regulation is that these skills are skills that are taught on an ongoing basis and cannot be developed overnight. And again, this is where we come in as educators, parents, guardians, or practitioners to sort of support kids in developing those skills. So some important strategies for or to support self-regulation in ADHD is teaching emotional awareness. And so teaching emotional awareness is pretty huge where supporting a child with ADHD and emotional or just self-regulation is concerned. And so one of the things that we want to do is to teach the child how to identify and name the emotion. So for example, if the child is experiencing sadness versus anger versus fear. One of the things that we want to do is to teach a child the skills that they need to be able to not only identify the emotion, but to be able to distinguish between anger versus fear, versus sadness. And so once we do that, then the child essentially starts developing the skills that they need to communicate the emotion that they're experiencing to us, the adult. Another important piece is the use of external support. So, and this is something that we will talk a little bit more about later on in detail. So essentially breaking tasks into steps and and allowing the individual to use their problem solving skills um to sort of navigate the problem. And so for example, if you want, let's say for example, you want a child to do laundry, you sort of break that down into steps for the individual to follow and sort of use visual aids to like support and reinforce that. Mindful breathing or mindfulness and breathing exercises are also pretty important, and that helps to support self-regulation because what it does is to create that sense of calmness for the individual to be able to regulate their emotions. Again, it's important to break tasks into steps for the individual. And so when we are assigning tasks to an individual with ADHD, one of the things that we have to remember is that a child with ADHD may not necessarily be able to process and recall information in the same way that someone who does not have ADHD will. And so we want to sort of break things down into manageable steps so that the individual can process what we are asking them to do. Positive reinforcement is also really important. So the child did something and they did a good job. Just following up by highlighting what they did and just reinforcing that with a praise or high P's. Um, so teach problem solving skills. I think that's also pretty important. If the child becomes overwhelmed or if he or she gets frustrated. So teaching the individual skills that they need to respond appropriately to that particular situation. Co-regulation for younger children. And so again, this is where the parent or the guardian comes in. And so essentially, what you're doing here is the parent is working with the child to help the child regulate. And so one of the first things where co-regulation is concerned is guided emotional support. And so co-regulation involves a parent or caregiver helping children to sort of manage their emotions by providing that calm and reassuring response. And so this helps the child to learn to identify and handle their feelings. Modeling the calm behavior is also important. And so if we, the parent or the caregiver, demonstrate calm responses to stressful situation, essentially what we are doing as the parent or the caregiver is teaching that child how to react calmly and thoughtfully rather than being impulsive or reactive. to that situation. Using gentle physical cues is also another important component of co-regulation. So gentle touches, hugs, hand holding, can also help children feel secure, promoting a sense of calm and aiding them in learning to self-soothe. So when we talk about ADHD and self-regulation, essentially what we want or what we're looking for is for an individual to sort of demonstrate um, self-regulation skills, right? Well, one of the things, as I mentioned before, that we have to sort of bear in mind is that a child with ADHD may not necessarily possess all of these skills. And again, this is where we as the adult, parent, or caregiver comes in to sort of help the individual learn and develop those skills. And so when a child has learned good self-regulation skills, essentially what that individual is able to do is to calm themselves whenever they feel angry. They may sometimes find comfort when they are sad. They may also be able to apologize when they've made a mistake and wait their turn in line, as well as stay focused when they are working on completing a task, amongst many other things. And so, again, just to reiterate that children with ADHD will typically need support to develop and enhance these skills. And so, as the practitioner or the parent or the caregiver, we sort of have to emphasize patience because these skills cannot be developed overnight. So many young people, especially those neurodivergent young people, can sometimes struggle with hearing the word no. And so neurodivergent young people, such as those with ADHD, may have difficulty managing strong emotions. And so sometimes hearing the word no can trigger frustration. It can also trigger disappointment or anxiety, making it harder for them to process the denial. And so sometimes for me, I think about myself as an adult, or even in my teenage years, like growing up. Sometimes I'll ask my parents for things, and my parents sometimes will say no. And that leaves me feeling disappointed. So think about a child with ADHD at, let's say, 5 years old, hearing the word no and sort of processing what no means can sometimes be a trigger for those individuals. And so a lot of times, just hearing the word no generates a reaction. And so sometimes that reaction is a negative reaction, right? But that's also a part of the process of supporting an individual with ADHD. Sometimes it may also lead to difficulty with flexibility. And so a lot of times you find that people or kids who have an ADHD diagnosis, they thrive on routine and predictability. And again, hearing the word no disrupts their expectations or plans, leading to stress or resistance as they struggle to adapt to sudden changes. And so think about a child who has a consistent routine of like coming home from school and watching TV and then having their snack and then going through their evening routine and then getting ready for bed. And so let's say on any given day that child comes home, The TV is no longer accessible to that individual. So what that does is throws the individual's routine out of balance. And so again, that causes the individual some amount of anxiety. And so in some cases, depending on the individual, we could also potentially see a behavior. And so again, as the adult or what we do is to sort of respond to the behavior that we're seeing, but also respond to that behavior in a meaningful way, whereby if the behavior is negative, we're sort of teaching the individual the appropriate way to respond. Developmentally, why do kids often go through a phase of saying no to everything? So a lot of times you will work with kids, and so sometimes you will provide directions or instructions, and sometimes the automatic response is no. And so I think for a lot of kids, saying no is healthy, it's normal, it's an important part of that child's budding autonomy. And so at this stage, children are typically beginning to feel their power. And so no, for a lot of kids, is a very powerful word that gets our attention as the adult. And so children often enjoy just trying out the word no, right? And so, as I said, a lot of times it's more so of a reaction factor because sometimes you'll place a demand on an individual and they'll look directly at you and they will automatically respond by saying no. And so sometimes it's just to see how the adult would react or respond to that individual saying no. Sometimes no is used to see that words get a reaction, and sometimes no just really means no. Okay. What would you do? So you have an individual who is 7 years old, and so this individual has been feeling frustrated and acting out. And so over the past month, they've been spending a lot of their time either throwing their basketball against the house or writing on his bedroom wall. And so this behavior has been disruptive to everyone in the home. And so he seems to react negatively whenever he hears the word no. So in a situation like this, what you could do in response to this individual is to sort of just get curious about his feelings. And so it is really important to approach this situation as well as the child in a calm manner. It's also important to acknowledge his feelings. You can also offer a positive alternative. So perhaps redirecting the youth or the individual towards an activity that allows him to channel his energy in a constructive way. And so, for example, you may say something like, how about we take the basketball outside and practice some shots together? And again, this is kind of where the co-regulation piece is important. You could also use positive language instead of saying no. So, as we stated earlier, no or using the word no sometimes can act as a trigger for an individual with ADHD. So avoid using or saying the word no directly. And so instead, offer guidance using positive language. So you may want to say something like, the walls aren't strong enough for basketball, but outside is a perfect place for it. It's also important to set up a calming activity afterwards. So after you've taken the individual outside, you may want to offer a calming activity. And so this again sort of helps the individual to regulate their emotions. So once he's engaged in the alternative activity, it's important to set up a transition activity. And so you want the individual to move from that activity into something calming. And so you may consider you doing yoga, meditation, or just calming music. And so explain that after some time with the basketball, he can choose a relaxing activity whenever the child or whenever he's ready. Validate his efforts. So praise him for moving outside with the basketball and making the positive choice. So this piece is really important because it helps the individual, it sort of gives the individual um, a sense of autonomy in this situation, which is important. So you may want to say something like, great job finding a way to use your energy without disturbing anyone. I really appreciate it. So these are just some of the um, strategies that you could do in response to this situation. So developmentally appropriate. So when we talk about developmentally appropriate, so this practice essentially promotes each child's optimal development and learning. And so it uses a strength-based, play-based approach as well as it uses a strength-based, play-based approach to joyful learning. And so when we talk about developmentally appropriate, essentially what we're saying is if we have an individual who is 5 years old, and let's say that individual has ADHD, developmentally, one of the things that we really want to find out is if that individual is 5 years old developmentally. And so by that, I mean, um, typically when a child is being assessed for ADHD in their psych report, the psychologists will usually indicate where the child is developmentally. And so sometimes we may have an individual who is 5 years old, but developmentally, that individual is 3 years old. And so if we have an individual who is biologically 5, but developmentally 3, then it simply means that any sort of activities or task that we have the individual engaging in must be suited for their developmental age, which is 3 years old. All right, so next up, we will be getting into the four functions of behavior. So we have escape, attention, tangible, and sensory. So with sensory, sometimes you may see an individual, they may rock back and forth because it feels soothing or it sort of helps the individual to calm down. So that's an indication that there might be some form of sensory related issue. Sometimes we may see a child pretending to be sick to avoid going to school or doing something. I know for me, sometimes when I was growing up and I did not want to do the dishes, because sometimes whenever my fingers are in water for too long, it causes me to experience some sort of sensory issues. And so sometimes when it was my turn to do the dishes, I would sometimes tell my mom that I'm not feeling well. And so that was my way of escaping from doing the dishes. Attention, sometimes we may see a child throw a toy to get their parents' attention. And so even if it's, let's say, for example, the child may get scolded by the parent. And so even if it's a negative attention, the child will engage in that behavior because it gets them the attention that they want. In terms of tangibles, so a child may try to access a specific item or activity. All right, so match these examples. So if we have a child who screams, look at me, and so if screaming gets access, then screaming will continue. And so is that A, B, C, or D? Okay, number two. So a therapist says, wash your hands, and the child runs out of the bathroom. Again, what function does this behavior correlates to? Number three, Michelle takes the iPad away from Aaron. So Aaron pinches her. And so if pinching gets access to the iPad, then pinching will continue. And number four, a child twirls his or her hair as they sit for an extended time. And so if twirling the hair gives that individual that sensory input they seek, then twirling the hair will continue. Okay. And here are your answers. So question number one, C. Question number two, B. Question number three, D. And four, A. All right, next up is sensory sensitivity issues. Okay. So sensory sensitivity issues is often categorized as an individual experiencing oversensitivity issues, which is hypersensitivity, or undersensitivity issues, which is hyposensitivity. So for someone who is oversensitive, so a child with sensory sensitivity issues might sometimes, if they are at home and a parent or just anyone in the home is vacuuming, and so if the child covers their ears in response to the sound or the noise that is being produced from the vacuum, then that's an indication that the child may be experiencing sensory sensitivity issues. Also, if a child who becomes overwhelmed or distressed by the feel of certain fabrics, like itchy clothing, and so typically that individual will avoid wearing those types of clothing. So some tips for sensory sensitivity issues, again, in response to um, someone being stimulated or overstimulated by noise. One of the things that we can do is to use noise canceling headphones or a quiet area for that individual to focus on any task that they have to get done. So in response to fabrics and the sensitive nature of it, one of the things that we could do is to allow choice in clothing materials and avoid tight or scratchy fabrics that may cause the individual discomfort. We can also use tagless clothing as well as soft texture, as these sometimes help to minimize any sort of sensory sensitivity issues. And again, if we have an individual who is over stimulated, it's important to incorporate breaks into any sort of assigned activities. So you want to give them breaks at certain intervals so that they can regulate. Again, quiet activities such as deep breathing or listening to calm music can often help to reset their sensory system. Okay, under sensitivity or hyposensitivity. So example here could be a child who seeks out sensory input, such as touching everything or spinning around frequently because they don't feel a sensation as strongly as others. Some tips to consider where hyposensitivity is concerned is consider using things like stress balls or fidget toys to support them during seated tasks. You may also want to use activities like sports, dancing, or yoga, because that again sort of helps the child to manage their sensory needs and improve their overall self-regulation issues. Background music is also important, as well as white noise machines. All right, so next up, we will be talking about structure and routine. So, within this context, when we talk about structure and routine, structure in itself refers to clear, consistent routines, rules, and expectations that provides a sense of order and predictability. And so, what this does is to help individuals know what to expect and how to behave in different situations. And so, important to note is that for a child with ADHD, it is important that we emphasize consistency, a simplified process, and a task list. And so essentially when we talk about consistency, if the child has gotten accustomed to the parent or just their routine, a particular routine on a Monday or throughout the week, one of the things that we want to do is to sort of stick to that and ensure that it is consistent either for the day or for the entire week. A simplified process, we don't want to overcomplicate their routine, and with our task list, they must essentially know what they are expected to do. So for example, we have an example here from individual's morning routine. So the child knows that at a specified time, they are expected to wake up, followed by brushing their teeth, followed by drinking water, followed by eating a healthy snack, followed by making sure that they have everything they need before they head out, and followed by um, engaging in yoga, followed by a 15-minute walk. And so again, sort of going back to this, what this does, or this morning routine does, it really does communicate that sense of consistency, a simplified process, and a task list. And so once the individual wakes up in the morning and they look at their visual schedule or their visual board, then the individual knows that once they are up, these are essentially the steps that they need to complete before they go for their 15-minute walk. So, one of the things that I want to emphasize is that it's never too late to start a new routine. And so every small step counts. And so even small adjustments will make a huge difference over time. One of the things that I want to really emphasize is where routine is concerned is that it really does provide a foundation. And so it also helps children to feel more secure and build independence. It's also important to stay patient and positive. And so change takes time, but each effort brings you closer to a smoother and more predictable day. So some steps that I think are really important for an individual with ADHD and their night routine. So one of the things that you want to do is to begin. One of the things that you want to do is to begin the evening with a calm.
Beginning with a calm wind down ritual. That's what you want to do. So when it comes to the end of the night, really putting something in place that's going to allow some calm energy to flow through. Like instead of it looking like doing some sort of like exercise or like physical activity, something that's like calming. Yeah.
Yeah. And one of the things that I also emphasize is reducing screen time. So at least an hour before the child their bedtime routine begins, one of the things that you want to do is to start reducing their screen time. Because sometimes you find that if the individual is on their iPad or cell phones or whatever electronic devices, um, let's say their bedtime starts at 8 and they are on the electronic device at 7:55. What that does is to delay the individual from getting settled, right? Which then makes the individual, then it essentially takes a bit longer for the individual to fall asleep. Again, you want to establish a consistent bedtime routine. So, for example, if the child is accustomed to going to bed at 7, you want to be consistent with that. You don't want to have the child going to bed at 8 on a Monday, at 10 on a Tuesday, at 11 on a Wednesday, and at 9 on a Friday. So just be consistent with the bedtime routine. Pay attention to the sleep environment to ensure it is conducive for a restful sleep. So essentially, any sort of distractions or noise, you sort of want to minimize that around the individual. Again, to sort of ensure that the individual sleeps well. Okay. Visual supports are pretty important when supporting an individual with ADHD. And so visual supports can be used for a number of reasons. And so visual supports also allows for the language processing. It's also a way of for us as the adult to sort of communicate to the individual what we want them to do. Another important visual support is the use of timers. And so timers also support transitions, they establish expectations and help the individual to remain focused. So, for example, if we want the child to move from one activity into the next, we can set our timer for, let's say, 20 minutes. And at certain intervals, we show the individual a timer. And as the timer counts down, we continue showing the individual the timer. And so what that does is to sort of mentally condition the individual that once the timer goes off, then it's time to move from one activity into the next. It also establish clear expectations for the individual. So essentially, they know what is meant to happen once the timer goes off, and they are also aware of what is coming next. It also helps young people to remain focused. And so if a child knows that they have um, 50 minutes to complete an activity, then it helps them to remain focused on that activity for the specified duration. So many of us use visual supports, and so we may use calendars and day timers, grocery lists. We may sometimes make a to-do list. We may also use apps, as well as sticky notes, reminders, and alarm clocks. And so similarly for folks with ADHD, they will also rely on the use of visual supports to help them better navigate and plan their day. So visual supports can help children communicate their feelings. And so, for example, if we have an individual who is, let's say, upset or scared or hurt or tired or sick, one of the things that we can do is to use visual supports to enable those individuals to communicate to us how they are feeling. Visual supports can also help make a task manageable. And so, for example, like one of the things that we talked about was breaking tasks into manageable steps and sort of reinforce that using visual aids. And so one way to do that is to sort of use visuals. So let's say, for example, you want the child to do laundry. So you could use your visuals to sort of break that down so that the child knows that the first thing they may need to do is to gather their laundry. Then they add their laundry to the dishwasher. Then they add their soap and they sort of go through a series of steps until the laundry is dried. Again, for washing dishes, you sort of provide steps that you want the individual to follow in order to get the task done. And one of the things that is important here is that the visuals communicate clearly, not just the steps, but also the expected action. Okay, what would you do? So we have a scenario here with an individual by the name of Max. And so Max is feeling angry and agitated. And so as a result of that, he's slamming doors and yelling at folks in his environment. And so a family member is concerned about the behavior that they're seeing. And so as a result, they tell Max to calm down. And then as a result of doing that, it intensifies the situation and his frustration starts to escalate. And so in escalating, he starts throwing items and knocking things over. So in terms of what you could do, I think it's important for you, the adult, to stay calm and grounded. It's also important to ensure his safety and avoid any sort of confrontation with the individual. And so if Max is in an escalated situation, it might be best to sort of give Max space until he has de-escalated. When approaching Max or having any conversation with him, it is also important to use a calm voice in your approach to Max. Again, it's also important to give Max space because one of the things that we want to do is to allow Max to regulate his emotions. And so if Max is at a 10 and we, the adult, go in at a 10, that could cause the situation to further escalate. And so again, this is where the co-regulation piece comes in for the parent to sort of work collectively with Max to sort of help him regulate his emotions. Yeah, so why start early? So it sort of helps to build a strong foundation. So teaching skills early provides children with essential tools that support learning, behavior, and emotional management as they grow. It also helps to promote a sense of independence, and so early skills development encourages children to handle tasks on their own, build confidence and self-reliance over time, make future development smoother. So early interventions and support also reduces challenges in life, making transitions and new skills easier to handle. And so an important takeaway thus far is that when we talk about the rationale behind starting early, is that what it does is to provide lasting benefits. And that also helps children with ADHD to thrive in their journey towards independence and growth. All right, so reward system. Uh, just some ideas of rewards that you can consider for individuals with ADHD. And this is not a restrictive list. I mean, there are tons of rewards that can be considered. Yeah. Tokenism. So tokenism refers to using tokens, points, or stars that can be accumulated and later exchanged for rewards. And so this method provides immediate feedback and help children visualize their progress. So for example, let's say you have Max, who we talked about earlier. And so let's say Max is working for, let's pick something from, so let's say Max is working for ice cream. In terms of tokenism, so what we would do is put an image here or the word ice cream to say to Max that this is what Max is working for. And so essentially what we do is to set up five activities or five things at home that we want Max to do. So one could be waking up at 8, making his bed. Another could be getting laundry done, maybe taking out the trash, and it goes on. And so, if for each of those activities that Max is able to get done, he gets a star or a token. And so, once he has accumulated all five, Max then exchanges that for his preferred item or the item that he is working for. And so that essentially gives you an insight into how tokenism works. So, in terms of motivation and consequences, so motivation, the is essentially the promise of rewards that increases intrinsic motivation, especially for children with ADHD who may struggle with delayed gratification. And where consequences are concerned, so while rewards encourage positive behavior, a lack of reward can also serve as a non-punitive consequence, signaling the need for improvement without harsh punishment. Again, another example of what a reward chart could look like. So the activities or the items are listed. And so for each of these items or activity that the individual completes and they do it successfully, then the individual gets a star. And then the individual exchanges that for the preferred reward. Key takeaways. So it's important to manage situations beforehand to prevent bad reactions. And it is also important to set specific times for your child to complete tasks. Right? It's also, again, really important that you write down the task times so your child can see how long they need to work on a particular chore. It is also important to remember that ADHD is not about knowing what to do, but about performance and consistency, which is harder for kids with ADHD. A lot of times you will find that kids with ADHD may struggle with consistent performance and need additional support. And so written lists or reminders can be helpful in providing that support. And so a key part of managing ADHD is avoiding temptations and distractions. It's also important to declutter the child's room or the environment. School bags once per week. That can sort of help to set the individual up for success. All right, so in terms of resources, so the ADHD Association of Greater Edmonton provides support, resources, and education. for individuals with ADHD and their families through workshops and support group. There's also the Alberta Health Services. So they're mental health services for children and youth. They also offer counseling, therapy, and psychiatric care for children and youth, addressing various mental health needs across Alberta. There's also Learning Disabilities Association of Alberta. And so the Edmonton chapter supports individuals with learning disabilities through resources, advocacy, and educational programs in the Edmonton area. There's also online resources that you could explore. So we have the Attitude magazine. So this is a quarterly publication offering articles. It also offers treatment, strategies, and resources for managing ADHD and related conditions of all ages. We also have Chad's ADHD podcast. And so these podcasts produces what is called ADHD 365 and all things ADHD podcasts. And so they feature experts who provide advice and strategies for managing ADHD across life stages for individuals, families, as well as educators. Okay, so what to do in terms of next steps? So if you are just, I guess, just curious, or if you have a child who you think may have an ADHD diagnosis, or if you want more information, a few things to consider. You may want to consult with your pediatrician or family doctor. You may also speak to your child's school administrators. Seek a specialist, so a behavior therapist or an occupational therapist or a mental health practitioner. You can also complete questionnaires and behavior checklists. And so essentially that provides you with more information as well as assessment details in relation to your child. And that is the end of my presentation. And so before I turn it over to Jonathan, I just want to say thank you for taking the time out to review this presentation. If you have any questions, please reach out to myself or Jonathan.
Yeah, thanks, Desroy. And if anyone's interested in any more help that they can, any more help that they need with their family or anything ADHD related, they can reach out to us. They can email us at that email. They can give us a phone call or a text. We also offer a 10-week ADHD brain training program. Um, We've had great success so far. How we do it is outlined in those weeks on that poster that you see on that slide, right from week 1 right to week 10. And it really does provide some really great skills for both you, the family member, and also the youth as well. And as we come to the end of this masterclass, I really want to take a moment to thank all of you for the participation, whether you're with us tonight or whether you're watching this into the future. It's been great to share these insights with you, and I hope you really found this session valuable. And before we wrap up, I have a small favor to ask. So, as therapists, we're bound by some ethical guidelines that prevents us from asking our clients for reviews, which makes sense because we had want to protect the integrity of that therapeutic relationship. However, since this masterclass is an educational event, it's one of the few opportunities where we can ask for feedback in the form of a Google review publicly. So if you found today's session helpful, I would really appreciate if you could take a moment to leave a review, whether you're watching it right now or even if you're watching this recording in the future. And if you want to leave a review then, that would be awesome too. You can do that by scanning the QR code on this slide. Um, or if you prefer, you can give us a Google search, and that's what the Google search will look like. Your feedback really helps others find our programs. It allows us to keep offering sessions like this. So, of course, there's no obligation, but your input would mean a lot to us. So we'll also be sending a follow-up email with the recording, all the resources we talked about, like the podcast and some YouTube videos and all of that stuff. Um, there's also going to be an internal review sent out with some guided questions and a direct link to that Google review as well. So thank you again for being here today, and I really look forward to seeing you at some future events.